Yo, I put it like wow, this that sound. These oaks don't work hard like me, I hope they know by now. Bayo Bab, stand my ground. Bro, these money trees go overseas like Percy Tau. I make sure you stay around, quiet when I'm under loud. No negatives allowed, me and positivity took a vow. I always play to win, don't anticipate loss. Mind always in the clown, my boy. Never think about the drop, never ever ever think about the drop.
All right, welcome to it, sports fans. It is the MKT Show podcast. It's a little something special. The All Blacks are in South Africa, and I thought we had to do something. We had to do something. They're doing something, so we're doing something. I'm going to bring you something a little special. A good friend of mine, a man who used to play academy rugby for the Sharks, and esteemed former work colleague, and he's now in the marketing sports space, over a decade of experience working with the Springboks and many other sort of sporting environments, and I thought it'd be awesome to do something with him because he's a rugby guy, he's my rugby guy. So I want to introduce you to a good friend of mine and somebody who I think has got incredible talent, somebody who's going to go a long way in this business. Lesego Thomas. We're going to talk All Blacks and all things around the greatest rivalry. It's awesome to have you with, bro.
Oh, brother, so good to be here. Firstly, thank you for extending the invite. It's something that we've been talking about for a very long time, you know, to have the conversations that we naturally have on a platform like this. So to be here on the MKT show, on the cusp of what should be a really, really enticing 4 weeks, huge honor, mate. Thank you. And keen to discuss all there is to discuss. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll be here sort of every week, and we'll try and do some response stuff as well, and we'll roll out some stuff throughout the series. And yeah, let's get into it. I think I want to start sort of here. You know, this rugby series for me is really, really interesting. If you've been listening to the MKT show over the last decade or so, you know I've always said I feel like the rugby business model is broken. I think it's been broken for a long, long time because rugby for me has two major problems. The one problem it can control. The other problem it cannot. Let's start with the one they can control. Their business model is wrong. You know, I would compare rugby to golf, and rugby thinks of itself slightly differently, right? I would compare it to golf. It's an exclusive, wealthy, it's a rich kid's sport. It's an exclusive sport. And rugby is almost fighting itself to try and become a mass participation sport. And that's something that they can control. And where the business model for me has been broken for a long, long time is that the international level in rugby is actually the best version of rugby you're going to get. Whereas in football, right, which is the model they're trying to copy, is the club level is actually the best level you can get of sport. So rugby is caught in a jam where the clubs are actually not as well funded as the international game, so they don't really know what to do with the business model. So what I've always argued for was make the international scene the focus, right? And rugby has refused to do it. They've tried Super 10, Super 12, Super 14, Super 15. That didn't work. The French are trying top 14. It's kind of clunky. We can see Wales are falling apart. We can see England, a lot of the clubs are falling apart just because they are trying to follow the football business model. So that they can control, getting the business model right of putting international rugby at the center. And quite frankly, I think you should tone down the rest. Curry Cup, URC, Heineken Cup, it's too confusing. It doesn't work. It's not consumer friendly. And quite frankly, it's not the elite sharp end of the sport. That they can control. They can fix that. The one they can't control is football, because what they really want to be is football. And they keep chasing that mass participation angle. And I say, why are you doing that? You're not football. You're an exclusive sport. And I hear people say this all the time. Rugby is for all shapes and sizes. It's not. You've got to be big. You've got to be strong. And to produce a rugby player is probably one of the most expensive things. Just one rugby player is one of the most expensive things you can do, which is why even in South Africa, a country we would consider a developing economy, largely speaking, not always, but largely speaking, the professional rugby players come from the institutions with lots of money. Even if the child is poor, a Siya Kolisi, he has to go to Grey because to actually develop you physically, mentally, and to socialize you to play rugby, it's hellishly expensive. And unlike football, you can't really play a game of full contact with your mates in the park from the age of 6 years old. You need referees. It's highly technical. So you'll never be football. And let it go. Stop trying to be a mass participation sport. And I think you could fix this. So that is just that sort of side of things. Having said that, what I respect about the All Blacks, what I respect about the Springboks, what I respect about what they're trying to do with the greatest rivalry, they're trying something. And I think we're getting closer to what it should be in terms of the international game being at the center of things. Having said that, what does this tour actually mean? What's it all about? Why are the All Blacks in South Africa? Are we approaching a time when club rugby will be pushed aside to where it belongs as the secondary product, and international rugby will come to the fore? These are the two greatest rugby nations in the history of the game. And I think it's really, really good for South Africa. I think it's good for New Zealand. And quite frankly, it's good for international rugby when the best play the best most often. I have a lot of other thoughts. Lesego, what are your thoughts on this tour and exactly what you think New Zealand rugby and world rugby are trying to do here?
First of all, you've said a lot of interesting points there in the opener that, if you don't mind me addressing a couple of before I get into answering the question. The first of which is just a point of view about franchise and club rugby. I think rugby is, as a sport in its entirety, is quite unique in that it can benefit with the different levels, that is, whether it be franchise, whether it be regional rugby, whether it be varsity, and even a level below, right? They can all benefit from, for lack of a better phrase, knowing their role and playing their role best. I think the minute a Currie Cup tries to, punch above its weight in terms of the actual level at which it is at, and URC likewise, and not operate as a direct, deliberate feeder into the international game, which is the premium product, then that's where we start to have, issues and confusion that start from within, which ultimately ripple into the public. So that's my point of view on club, in terms of its relation to the entire ecosystem that is the sport of rugby. As far as this tour is concerned, it's quite interesting. I mean, we all know that it's the first time that a tournament, an event of this kind, or the incoming tour of the All Blacks to South Africa in this way, in this manner, takes place in the last 30 years. It's the first time in the 30 years that it takes place. But the context I see is a little bit different. I think if you look back at what happened in 1996, it was the first year post our reintroduction into the global space, into the global scene, and into the global sport, right? Pre-94, we weren't really involved. We weren't involved at all. If you then look at what happened and what the state of rugby is from New Zealand side of things, the sport wasn't yet professional or professionalized. People were not playing for a fee. They were playing voluntarily. It was it was a hobby for all intents and purposes, right? Although it was a lot more developed, it wasn't anywhere where it is now, right? Or where it ultimately became a couple of years thereafter. So where we were is we needed some sort of competition. We needed some sort of activity so that our sport could grow from having not been involved from the prior 2 years and all the years before that. So, whereas now, that's not quite the case. Now, there are a different set of, I think, tests and challenges that they're going for. You mentioned that it is the top two sides in the sport going against each other over 4 tests. I think on the pitch and the entertainment value that provides and the level of investment that will provide from not only just the two nations and their fan bases, but the entire rugby world has the potential to be unprecedented, which could benefit the sport at large in terms of its entertainment value and it creating a entertainment experience that could incentivize other curious guests, audiences to want to partake in it, particularly with the fact that we are going into a World Cup next year. So I think there's that part of it. Interestingly, though, from what I've seen, from the time the All Blacks touched down in Cape Town, which should now be about 3 or so weeks before today or ago, the level of excitement that I noticed from the South African fans was, first of all, unlike anything that it's not anything new. We know that, you know, there are the Cape Crusaders and the...
Whoa. Wait, we need some context. What are the Cape Crusaders? Because not everybody's a rugby fan. It's an interesting anomaly in South Africa.
No, for sure. So the Cape Crusaders, the Mdantsane Maoris, Mdantsane being a village out in the Eastern Cape, which is home to a passionate rugby fan base, are basically a set of South African fans who support the All Blacks and who support the All Blacks over the Springboks. And not just the All Blacks, but New Zealand style of rugby. So this fandom comes to life and came to life a lot when, in the days of Super 10, 12, 14, and Super Rugby as a whole, the incoming tours, the New Zealand teams would tour, would have the South African legs of the Super Rugby campaigns. So that's when out in Newlands, you would see a full Newlands stadium split down the middle in terms of their allegiance, where 50% of the fans are supporting the Stormers and the other half supporting, be it the Blues, the Chiefs, the Highlanders, the Hurricanes, or the Sailors. And that was a testament, and it's a sign of just how not only passionate the fans are down in both the Eastern and Western Cape, but how passionate they are of New Zealand style of rugby and the New Zealand rugby product, which is a distinct and entertaining product. So now, without us being in Super Rugby, that you don't get that fandom, you don't get that investment. And I don't care who you are, the Leicester Tigers, La Rochelle, and Glasgow Warriors, and all the other sides whom we've been competing against, they just don't have the heritage that the New Zealand sides have created in the South African market. And us not being in Super Rugby, we don't access that. And if we don't access that, that is huge money being left on the table, I would imagine, from the organizers, sponsors, partners, and others alike, other stakeholders alike. So I think a part of what's happening with this tour is for all those stakeholders whom I just mentioned to test the appetite for incoming New Zealand rugby teams and playing over an elongated time period in South Africa again. And that's why you saw such a great turnout when they played the Stormers, a great turnout when they played the Bulls over the weekend, and surprisingly, a great turnout when they played in the rain on a Tuesday when they played the Sharks last week. So, and I suspect we'll get a similar turnout when they play the Lions next week Tuesday out at Ellis Park. So I think that and the outcomes and the results of those games in particular will give the powers that be something to think about, particularly with the fact that the obligation to play the Northern Hemisphere teams is only up until 2030, which is over the next, 4 years? And this is as best a time between now and then to really test the appetite and to do something about thereafter, should it be that enticing and that worthwhile. So I think that's another part of the equation that's taking place here.
You've touched on something that we'll talk a little bit about the All Blacks and them possibly, we've heard them talking about missing South African rugby and how that's affected them. I've got some thoughts on how it's affected them, but it's really, really interesting to hear you talk about the business side of things, Lesego, of what they're testing and sort of testing the market. And on both sides, right? On both sides, they'll obviously want to test the market in New Zealand, but South Africa, a country 12 times the size of New Zealand in terms of population and all of that. So yeah, really, really interesting. I mean, let's move on. I want to move on to what's actually going to happen on the field. I want to tell you what I think is going to happen, and then I'll let you have a stab at it, Lesego. You know, for me, it's been a really interesting lifetime relationship with the Springboks. My friends always ask me, why don't you have a Springbok shirt? And I remember growing up and it was always complicated. So I went to the 1995 Rugby World Cup final. I was there. And the Springboks in South Africa, I think a lot of people may or may not know this. They're a very complicated team because everybody likes to win, right? It's certainly in the Western world, being attached to winning is awesome because the Western mentality, and we're British, we're a former British colony with sort of a capitalist system. It's zero sum. For me to win, you have to lose, and essentially that is sport. And the Springboks are quite divisive, or were quite divisive, and they're still on the journey. I think Lesego spoke about the Cape Crusaders and the sort of South African contingency that still supports New Zealand because South Africa is racially divided. Like, people don't like to talk about it, but it's still deeply racially divided and a country that's still nation building, right? And I think it's been really, really interesting to me to kind of see how the series is playing on those emotional tropes, trying to sort of elicit all of that because it's good for business, quite frankly, and it does mean a lot to a lot of South Africans. So I think it's important that we address that. I don't like the mainstream media is never going to talk about it because they don't like the controversy, but South Africa is racially divided, and that's why there are still a massive number of particularly people of color that support the All Blacks because they don't feel included in the Springbok dream, if you want to call it that, as South African nation builds. It is what it is. You know, whether you're right or wrong, that's maybe a conversation for a different time. But I want to move it onto the field to say, I think this is a really, really interesting series because I always have a battle between sort of two things for me, between World Cups. The Springboks are in a country that's really struggling, South Africa. We have to call it what it is. It's an unbelievable country, and I'm not a romantic. Right? I try to call it as it is. In a country that's struggling, the Springboks is one of the few things that is world-class, and when it goes against the world, it is the best in the world. And for South Africans, I think so much of life is just such a struggle that when you live vicariously through the Springboks, you feel part of the greater the globe, and you also feel like, hey, we can compete too. And not only can we compete, we can beat you. And I think there's a value to the Springboks in that. And why I'm telling you that is that I like to build between World Cups because I don't think anything matters in rugby besides the World Cup. It's not like the English Premier League. I think the English Premier League is the most important tournament in football, right? The World Cup's nonsense in football for another podcast, right? But in rugby, again, it's the inverse business model. Rugby, the World Cup for me is the pinnacle. And I like to accumulate caps between World Cups. I'm really, really interested to see what is Rassie Erasmus going to go with because he's so enlightened and he thinks laterally and always innovating. Is Rassie going to be trapped in the Springboks are kind of like Kaizer Chiefs or Orlando Pirates. They affect South Africa's economy more than anyone. If they win, we celebrate. If they lose, we drown our sorrows. So either way, they're affecting the economy. So Rassie's trapped. Do I try to win the series or do I give the youngsters caps in a pressure-filled situation? And that's where he's going to be split. Personally, I don't care if the Springboks don't win this series. I mean, obviously, I want them to win, but I want the youngsters to play. I hope Rassie doesn't fall into the trap of, I have to win this, because the winning mentality is there within the Springboks, right? I hope in 4 or 5 positions, I don't need to see Eben Etzebeth, right? I do not need to see Handré Pollard. I don't need to see Jesse Creel. I really don't. I know what they can do. I don't need to see Damon Willemse. I don't need to see these guys. I know what they can do. Bring them in sparingly or play them 2 of the 4 tests, because personally, I would like us to build caps under pressure. I want to see the youngsters really, really put under pressure. And I don't want to see all of our wings play as well in all the games. I'd like to see some of the youngsters give them game time against the All Blacks when it matters, because the pressure is going to be right up. Because I don't want, we get a situation, we get to the World Cup and people are coming in for the first time. But let me give you what I think is going to happen in the series. I still think the Springboks, even with the second team, are going to absolutely hammer the All Blacks. I think it's going to be sort of a 3-1, 4-0 even on. I just think there's too much momentum. The squad building that Rassie's done, he's done an incredible job transitioning the squad. The age profile of the squad is perfect. He's transitioned out some of the old guys, he's phased out. So the average age of the squad, again, is high 20s. So even those guys that are on the back end, there's enough of the squad where physically there's hungry guys that are at the peak of the game and they've played enough caps. So I think 3-1, I think even 4-0 is on the cards. Lesego, what are you saying? Who do you think wins this and why do you think that?
Sure. Again, interesting points. You know, that my answer to that question almost has a little bit, you know, it's a little bit nuanced because I think the eventual scoreline is one part of it, whether it's 3-1, 4-0. I think what is potentially also interesting is the sequence of the tallying. For example, who wins the first test? And how do they respond in the second test? And then how do they respond in the third test, which could potentially be a decider in SA? And how does that then ultimately set up for the fourth? So, and I think that for me is something that could be interesting. For example, the All Blacks, I don't think, have the luxury of volume of players that the Springboks have, purely because of the size of the nation, right? I mean, they're a population of how many? 10, 15 million?
5.
5. You see, I mean, there we go, right? A tenth, if not more or less, than our population. So the volume, right, and the approaches at grassroots level are also not the same. I mean, ours has intensified over the years significantly. Theirs, I don't think, has intensified as much. So they don't have the eventual benefits that, you know, that breeds that we do. So where that puts them is selecting the best 23 now and backing it, right? So who's their starting front row? Who's their second row? And I think what we'll see from the All Blacks is the team that they start with, who I think 90% will start between now and the last test, is going to be who's going to take them to the World Cup next year. And that's the first team, and that's the A team, and everyone just gets on board because they don't have the luxury of anything else. Whereas, and I don't know, that could be a benefit for the All Blacks because there's certainty, there's continuity, and there's rhythm, and there's all those little details that everyone buys into very early into the process and the journey. Whereas us, you know, there's still questions of who's the starting fly half. You know, we know that, I mean, the reports today were saying that, you know, Sia seems to be mostly on track to crack a start this weekend. If he's not in, you know, the next better player is someone who doesn't have anyway, like doesn't have 3 years worth of, I mean, this is his first year of international rugby in Paul de Villiers, right? I mean, the locks, we've been severely hampered with our locks there. Who then comes in? Yeah. There's the Kubus Visa that comes in. There's a Ron Nokia who isn't a Franco Mostert or an Eben Etzebeth, you know. So there are those gaps and there are that bit of chopping and changing that could get in the way of building the kind of continuity that the All Blacks, I think, will get right from this tour simply because of the consistency that they have no choice but to go into with. So that's one part of it. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll win the games. They could still have all that continuity and we could still be, you know, too strong for them at Ellis Park, which is a challenging ground for them and anyone who sets foot there. On the Highveld, it is the mecca of South African and Springbok rugby. And it just, elicits a different sort of atmosphere and spirit amongst the Springboks and Springbok fans that, you either crumble under or rise to. But it does demand an unusual response, perhaps compared to how you would typically respond to any other international outfit that you go up against. So there's that. And then going into the second test from there, then, we know that the All Blacks are not going to change much. What do we then do? Do we then go and give another flower for start? Do we now look to blood a lot of the other younger players to give them a chance in such an environment, which, relative to what the All Blacks approach would be a gamble that they're not taking, right? Which potentially makes them, opens up a gap that is there to be exploited. Not to say that it would, but it's there.
Yeah.
And I think those elements, the continuity from the All Blacks and the benefit of the vast talent pool that the Springboks have, and how those two come against each other over these 4 tests, I think will be a very, very fascinating contest specifically to look out for. I specifically am looking out for that, and I want to see how either approach would fare either side.
So who wins and why do you think it's 4-game series, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, by the way. Sorry, let me just address that. What are we doing with 4 tests? Don't have an even number in a series. It's stupid. It increases the likelihood of a draw. It's pathetic. 3 or 5. That's the but anyway, who do you think wins it? It's pathetic. But
before I answer the question, that goes back to the point that I was making about it being more of a commercial test than
a sporting
a rugby tournament.
Endeavor. I hear you.
And as a sporting, you know what I mean? Like it's more commercial than it is about the raga. It just so happens to be in the context of rugby, and that's not a bad thing.
Look, score will be 3-1. I think,
3-1.
Yeah, New Zealand are going to get 1. It's the Springboks. New Zealand are going to get 1. I think New Zealand are going to get 1 in SA. And I don't think that one will come from the States. I think the one will be, and I think that one will be either the first or the second test.
Interesting. Why is that? Do you think they're going to be fired up, as in like the enthusiasm is going to take them into it and then the quality will take over, or what are you thinking?
I just don't see, just from the momentum that I am seeing from here and from them, I don't see them losing the first 2 games in a row. I think who they choose in the first game will be exactly who they go with in the second game. And I don't think Rassie will take that very same approach. And if they do, I think that after a first loss, they'll be a lot more fired up in the second test and we'll leave with something.
Interesting. Interesting. I hadn't looked at it from that angle. That's a really interesting way to kind of look at the psychology of it. I'd love to know what people think about that. Remember, leave your thoughts in the comments as well, because I'd love to sort of read out your comments and get some interaction going as we go throughout the series, because that's a really, really interesting approach to things. And talking about the result, right? I think something for me that's really been interesting, and I've been observing, and I was talking to Lesego and lots of people about this years ago. I mean, I've known Lesego close on 4 or 5 years now, but I've been talking about this since years ago. Since Richie McCaw and that batch retired, I said, what is going on? What is going on? And I really want to talk this. What is going on with the New Zealand rugby talent? And here's what I think has happened, all right? And it used to be an uncomfortable truth for New Zealanders, but now they're seeing it, right? And New Zealand's a really interesting country. I went to New Zealand and I really saw the similarities actually between New Zealand and South Africa, except the dynamics are inversed because the Maoris are the minority and the sort of European settlers or the white guys are the majority and in charge to South Africa. But the dynamics are quite similar, where the sort of Pacific Island guys were sort of their great athletes. You think about it throughout the ages. And even Daniel Carter, I think it's been marginalized that he's Maori, and there's a bit of a kind of political positioning dynamic there. But he's half Maori, right? And he's the greatest rugby player for me of all time, along with Richie McCaw. It pains me to say it, but Daniel Carter is about as good as we've ever seen. But something that's happened is that rugby's gone global, and New Zealand, more than anybody, has suffered because that's all they've got. Rugby is, in terms of sporting endeavor, New Zealand, they have paddling, they have sort of off-road racing, they love a bit of that. Paddling, they're unbelievable. They're some of the best paddlers and extreme sport people in the world. Their nature's incredible. But when we talk about the real mainstream sport, the only thing they have is rugby. And the Pacific Island guys were crucial in creating the depth that Lesego was talking about earlier. Well, guess what's happened now? Billy Vunipola, Marco Vunipola. You look at the Scotland kid? Is it Tui Polotu, whoever he is? He's the Scotland captain now. 15 years ago, he's on the bench for New Zealand. Well, guess what? The Pound called the New Zealand players and the Fijian players and the Samoan players. So the Pacific Islanders, the dream used to be you play for the All Blacks because that's where the money is. So now what the Fijian players, now the Samoans, now the Tongans say, no, I'm going to go play in France. I'm going to earn 4 times the money that an All Black contract is going to pay me, because even if I'm the third choice wing, I'll be the first choice in France. I'm going to earn 4 times the money in France, and I'm not going to pay New Zealand taxes. And then I'm going to retire and move back to Fiji and live like a king. So they have lost their best athletes, right? Let's face it, the Pacific Island guys are their best athletes, right? Every now and then they would fill it in with the white guys, right? And then that's just the history of New Zealand rugby when they've been successful. The Pacific Islanders are best. They've lost that. They've lost that depth. They no longer have their best Pacific Island athletes playing for the All Blacks. This is my opinion. And for me, this is what's happened to New Zealand rugby. It's not so much the creme de la creme, right? They've managed to keep the 4 or 5 world-class players they have. But the All Blacks have not produced a legendary All Black since, for me, 2019. Because I don't think Barrett is... I think Barrett's a utility player. His brother's a better player than him. Geordie Barrett, I think, is a better Barrett. But they haven't produced an iconic, truly iconic All Black, probably since 2019, when that era truly retired and Richie McCaw and the boys left with that whole era. And I think that is a big problem for them, is that the North came calling with the Pound, and the Pound took away their Polynesian, Pacific Islander, or Samoans, Tongans, Fijians, and they don't want to play for the All Blacks anymore because it's all about the money. It's all about the money. Lesego, what has happened to the All Black talent, and why is New Zealand, for me, you know, I no longer call them the All Blacks, by the way, for those who want to know. I call them the New Zealand International Men's Rugby Team, because this is not the All Blacks. Like, having Ardie Savea as your peak talent is a joke. Like, I'm so sorry. There are people telling me Ardie Savea's world class. Do me a favor. For the All Blacks, come on, man. Lesego, your thoughts?
I disagree with that. I think if you look at the era and the caliber of players that have come through, for the purposes of the team, I think we make a mistake when we start to compare them intergenerationally. I think with the minute we start looking at the players and how fit they are for this generation and for this era, then I think that becomes a lot more of a fair comparison, right? I think, and that's not just in rugby, I think that's the world over. I think even if you look at the Springboks, yes, this is the most successful era of Springbok rugby, but the minute we start to compare them pound for pound to Jake's era, and they're all more successful. And because they're more successful, we would diminish that era. I think that's where we start making a bit of a mistake, because they would be second best to this era. But if you look at them in isolation, we then realize just exactly how great they were. So I think the same approach and the same assessment style needs to be made with the All Blacks. Let's not compare them to the Richie McCaws. I think there's quite frankly no team that compares to Richie McCaw, Dan Carter, and their era, a la the 2015 All Black. There's no team that compares that has ever been. So let's not do that. Let's look at how they are for this era. And for this era, the fact of the matter is that they're second best, right? The fact of the matter is they got to the World Cup final. And the fact of the matter is, to date, in 2026, they're undefeated, right? So in comparison to previous talent, sure, something is, maybe missed out. And I think you hit the nail on the head there by saying that a lot of the players are being incentivized to move abroad, up north. I think France is also, when you spoke about the Vinipola brothers, I think France with Peatuma Vaka and the second rowers and Moefana and all those players. I mean, can you just imagine if they had just channeled into the All Black system? So I think France in their poll is been tremendous and been a tremendous handicap for the All Blacks. But I do think that it's a combination of factors. I think that's one of them. I think the fact that, whether we like it or not, regularly playing a player like Corey Flynn for the Crusaders benefited tremendously from touring to South Africa. 1 week plays against Gary Botha on a high and dry Loftus, and the week after going down to Newlands to play against Skalk Brits, accompanied by Skalkberger and Andries Beck and all these sorts of guys, right? Year after year after year. So for 4 years leading into the World Cup, that's the level and quality of competition that they're getting. I think the absence of that and them just playing the one style, which is, this keeping the ball alive and not having as physical a game as they did before, because they don't have a benchmark to measure themselves against consistently. I mean, that benchmark only comes when they're playing against the Springboks. I think pound for pound against all the other nations, they do fare physically. It's just us whom they come up significantly shorter than.
Yeah, no, but I think you're making a good point there. So I do want to ask you about that, because fair enough, the intergenerational thing is it's always going to be difficult, especially when you come out of perhaps once in a lifetime, and this Springbok team maybe once in a forever, right? Is my thing about the All Blacks is that even when they weren't winning, because one could argue the actual greatest era was Tana Umanga and Christian Cullen and those guys. Some people might argue, having, for those of us that are old like me, you remember Ruben Thorne was a third choice, second choice, blindside sort of lock. I mean, Ruben Thorne's one of the greatest captains rugby's ever seen, and people don't even remember him because they didn't win. Because, if you haven't read Ian Foster's book, a great All Black about why they had the drinking culture under Umanga, and sort of that era was eaten by lifestyle. Peter Alatini, Alama Iremia, Andrew Mertens, believe it or not. Andrew Mertens never won a world. How insane is that? Justin Marshall. One might argue on paper, if you truly look at it in terms of iconic from 1 to 15, you're talking about Jeff Wilson, Jonah Lomu, Iremia. I mean, these are Frank Bunce. These are the creme de la creme. That it didn't. Bunce in that '87 side. Maybe he did win a World Cup. I can't quite remember. But Osborne. Listen to some of these names. Zinzan Brook. These are guys. Fitzpatrick. These are guys who didn't win a World Cup. Man, I think those guys might be better, or not. It's touch and go. But the thing about the All Blacks, and Lesego, this is what I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is that they were always at the very top, right? What was their thing? We're winning 98% of our test matches. Well, what's happened to that? Because for the All Blacks, winning between World Cups was always a thing because unlike South Africa, yes, the Springboks are a big deal. They aren't the only deal. Unlike New Zealand, we've got the Proteas, right? We've got Kaizer Chiefs. We've got Orlando Pirates. We've got Bafana. Like, we've got other stuff. We've got swimmers. We've got, like, South Africa, we got Ernie Els. We've got Retief Koos. And we've got, South Africa's got lots of other stuff going. The All Blacks have nothing else going on ever. It's the All Blacks 24/7. So for them, it's not even or at least back in the day, it's not even an option to build between World Cups. The All Blacks have to win 98% of their tests, and that changed. 3 coaches, by the way, in the last 6 years. That is very un-All Black-like. And that's another thing that I want to hear your take on. So what do you think about the standard just dropping in terms of they're not winning between World Cups? So forget about the intergenerational comparison. Why aren't they winning between World Cups now? What happened to that? Has the standard dropped?
I think it's the standard. I think it's also the standard and the quality of the players that are coming through. I mean, if you look at all those players that you are talking about now, right? Even if you bring it a lot more recently, I mean, Ruben Thorne, subsequent to that was Richie McCaw, and Richie McCaw, Jerry Collins, Rodney Solealo. Hard, tough as nails, right? And
Marty Holler not even getting in the team. Marty Holler not even getting in the team.
Chris Masoe not even getting in the team. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and Chris Masoe is legendary player. Barely cracked the nod for the All Black Rooster at the
Caleb
time,
Rolfe,
right?
Caleb Rolfe can't even get in the squad. Caleb Rolfe cannot even get in the squad.
Right. So we have that, and then what we then and then that really just carried them all the way through to 2015. I think after 2015, when those guys had retired, right? Because it wasn't just Richie McCaw and Dan Carter retired. Conrad Smith, Mahanonu, Sam Whitelock was starting to age from that point onwards. Kevin Mialamu, and these are people that had broken into the squad in 2003. Right? 2003 they broke into the squad. So they went from 2003 right up until 2015. You know? So my point is they were an insanely talented group of players. They were quite honestly and the reason why, you know, to your point, that they won every single year is because they played for that long, right? Quite literally, the era before them, right, was John Mitchell's guys, right? And the era before, it had Carlos Spencer and Dagi Howlett and Joe Rakathoko and Ruben Thorne, as you mentioned, Chris Jack, all those sorts of guys. But for all intents and purposes, they were a buffer between Sean Fitzpatrick and Zinzan Brook and those guys, John Aloma and those guys, Andrew Burton's, and all those guys, to McCaw and his generation. They were only in the mix for about...
But I want to push you on what happened, guys. So, like, why? What
I'm saying, because that generation of players played for that long. What I'm saying is, once they got to 2015, they just, and all those guys left. First of all, they created a vacuum that would have been impossible to fill thereafter. And the standard just dropped because everybody else, pound for pound, is not those players. I don't think that New Zealand were great because of a system. I think they were great because of the group of players they had. And the group of players they had were quite honestly generational.
But then this is where nobody gives Rassie the credit. Do you think they should manage the transition better to go, don't wait till Richie McCaw falls off the cliff. Let's transition guys. Let's be giving guys caps between World Cups so that when McCaw goes, the next guy already has 35 caps to come in, which is where, let's face it, nobody gives Russ credit, but how well has he managed, you know, a legendary core has left. No, nobody's talking about it. Mbonambi's out. Nobody's noticed because he's facing hookers. There's guys with 15, 20 caps already, right? So did the All Blacks mismanage the transition from that sort of era. So think of Man United, right? How badly they managed the transition from Alex Ferguson to the next era. Did the All Blacks, do you think, did they mismanage transitioning out of those players? Sort of the change management. Was it poor or was it an impossible job, do you think, as you say?
I think it was a bit of both. I think, but I don't think they did not try. I think you definitely saw glimpses of that. We all knew that Sam Cane was touted, and he was even labelled as the heir to Richie McCaw's throne. Broke his neck a couple of times, so that kind of got into the way of those plans. Aaron Smith, we saw him get into the system, and I think that's really the best case of the example that you're mentioning there. So we saw Aaron Smith. Richie Mwanga, yes, did come, but wasn't really an understudy to Dan Carter, didn't really take over from him. So, but the reason why is because they don't have as many players. They don't have as vast a talent pool as we do to be able to go about the mission as successfully as they did. So the intent was there, absolutely. Because Kieran Reid was captain thereafter, right? Kieran Reid was captain. Ade Sevilla had come in. Ade Sevilla was the second best Sevilla, by the way, right? Because we all know Julian Sevilla and we all know what he was about. You know what I mean? So
well, he stay out the nightclubs, Julian.
Well, there we go, right? So we did see glimpses of that. It just was not enough because of, I think, just sheer population size.
You've touched on something brilliant. I want to close this out by saying, and I want to get your take before we move on to our final topic here, is I find Ardie Savea to be such a fascinating figure because I don't see him as an all-black captain, quote unquote, because you can't fake leadership. Lesego, you and I both played. I mean, you were a professional rugby player, so you really took it to the Sharks Academy. You took it to that level, so you understand. But rugby is so unique. Sport is unique, but rugby is quite unique. You know, the coaches pick their captain, but actually the players have their own captain. Even if the guy is the captain on the field, the players, you can lie to fans, you can lie to coaches, you can put on the PR. You can't lie to change rooms because the guys know who the actual alpha dog is. And I find Ardie Savea so fascinating because he's almost a little bit of a lifestyle guy as well. He's got a bit of his brother in him. And in life, we are who we are. He's almost a little bit too eccentric for me to be presidential enough to be a captain. Because the thing about his personality, and we're going to talk about Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu in a bit, which is quite similar. It can be divisive if you're a fun person, because it's fine if you win. But what happens when things aren't going well? It can be divisive where guys start to think, this guy doesn't take it seriously. Why do I have to? So I find Ardie Savea to be particularly interesting and to be sort of an emblem of what the All Blacks are, is they're just less serious than they were. Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid, as you mentioned, Tana Umanga. These are what I view as sort of presidential statesmen-like All Black captains. And I see Ardie Savea as a symbol of the sort of deterioration of the All Blacks, because I don't take him very seriously. I think he's an unbelievably talented rugby player, but talent doesn't make you a captain and a sort of a leader of arguably the biggest rugby brand in the world. So just your thoughts on that to round this out.
Yeah, but I suppose then, I mean, it's not like they did not try the quote-unquote head boy approach in having Scott Barrett, and that didn't quite work. I mean, you could see that even with Scott Barrett on the field, everyone followed the lead on the field of Ardie Savea, right? I think if I just also give this example of the 2023 Rugby World Cup final, right? Sam Cane goes off for the 20th minute. They end up losing the game, having missed 5 points by a point, right? And I think, in fact, I believe the main and the biggest reason why they were able to be that within such close distance to quote unquote an upset was because Ardie Savea was still on the pitch. And I think he's got to this side and this group of players, I think he has that talismanic effect. I think, again, he's not Richie McCaw. He's not Tana Umanga, right? But not many players are their predecessors. You know what I mean? Like, you don't. Tom Curry is not Neil Beck or Richard Hill.
No,
you know what I'm saying?
He's not.
Ben Earl.
No, he's not.
Do you know what I mean?
He's not. He's not Neil Beck.
Do you know what I'm saying?
No. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Ben Earl is not Lawrence Delelio. You know, so Marcus Smith is not Johnny Wilkinson. So what I'm saying is, but they are fit for this generation in this era of rugby.
Point taken.
In the case of Adi, I think he's got that talismanic effect to this group, and I think the call to make him captain, post having attempted or experimented with Scott Barrett, which did not work, was the right call.
Point taken, and I think a very good point. You know, I'm perhaps living in the past, and I've got an image of what a captain should be, and you may be right. Ardie Savea is, you know, horses for courses. It's a new era. We used to be on, you know, Mix It, for those of us that are old enough. But now, if you say I'm on Facebook, people laugh you out of the room. Old people like me are still on Facebook. People say TikTok. I want to scroll.
But here's the thing. Both points of view are valid. There's no right or wrong, right? They both points of view do exist. So, and I think that's the thing. There is no one point of view, right? There is no one. I mean, you could find that the quote unquote statesman like image and leader in such a team is what works, or you could find that one that's just fit for the cause. You know, who's to say?
So I mean, talking about somebody who's been interesting is Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu. He's quite a divisive character within sort of the Springbok and the global spectrum. So probably more in South Africa than internationally, because internationally people really see him in the Springbok shirt and they see him as a sort of this. He's very different from any Springbok fly-halves we've had before. And I find him to be a really interesting figure. And South Africa internally are quite divided because a lot of South Africans want entertaining rugby. So let me state my position why I find him divisive within South Africa personally. And again, it goes back to what I was saying about Ardie Savea. You know, I hear a lot of South Africans, and they've always said this, is he plays the kind of rugby that I want to see. I want entertaining. And I've always said the fly-half position is the most unique position in rugby. People say, I want that guy to be a playmaker. And I've always argued, I absolutely do not want that at the test level. You know, Kgafi de Toy is what I think about when I think about talented, enigmatic Carlos Spencer. You know, even in the 90s, people figured out that playmaker doesn't actually work at fly half if you want to win. If you want to excite, play Carlos Spencer, play Tony Brown. If you want to win, you play Andrew Mertens. If you want to win, you play Stephen Larkham. You play people that are an accountant. Because the fly-half position for me needs to be the most predictable person on the field. The whole team needs to know 3 phases ahead where the ball is going to go, which is why I don't think Manie Libbok works under pressure. And I don't think Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu is going to work in the long term. Every now and then, just because he's so talented, it's going to come out. But I think the challenge with him, for me, is his personality. The personality of wanting to behave like a footballer in rugby, particularly South African rugby, which is an unbelievably conservative environment. Whether people want to accept it or not, the breeding ground for South African rugby is still elite, private, largely, some semi-private boys' schools. And if they aren't private and they're government, they're largely Afrikaans conservative schools. So what that means is the shape of what it means at its very core and essence to be a Springbok is humility, team first, and me second. But Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu, I interviewed his father about a year and a half ago because I didn't know, besides knowing who his grandfather is, you can go and look up sort of his historical ties to South Africa and liberation. I didn't know who his father was. And I interviewed his father, and it was really illuminating to me why he is the way he is. And then I found out his brother's like a big reality star. And I said, it makes sense. It runs through the family, this sort of braggadocious kind of way of operating. And I've got no problem with that, by the way. He's more than entitled to live the way he lives. My problem comes if you want to be the Springbok fly half. You cannot be that. You cannot be an individual because he behaves like a soccer player. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. She's an influencer or whatever. And somebody alerted me to this. I didn't know about it because I don't really care about that side of football. But I'm deeply concerned that he starts to want the accoutrements. So guys like this, like what rugby brings, then instead of loving the rugby and then the accoutrements and the trappings come second, I think he's a guy who's in love with what rugby does for him rather than what he can do for rugby. And at fly half in the Springbok position, no, sir. For me, that's not going to work long term, no matter how talented he is. I want Andre Pollard. I think without Andre Pollard fits at the World Cup, South Africa cannot win it. And I was right last time. Lesego, I used to tell you all the time that it's not going to work with Mani Libbok. And I think it's the very same with if South Africa keep going down this path. The thing about Sacha, you can't change him now. You've paid him, the country rewards him, and he gets the endorsements. You can't change him. And by the way, he comes from Bishop's, one of the wealthiest schools in the world. So it's not like he's short of money. There's nothing you can offer him for him to tweak his behavior. This is what he is. This is the monster that it is, and you have to live with it. Can it work in the Springbok setup? What are your thoughts on Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu?
Sure. I think the first thought there is that, and you mentioned it now, there's no going away from the talent. And he is quite honestly one of the most talented players that we have seen at this level in a very long time. Just pure talent. And it's the kind of talent that you can, it's because it's so ingrained in him. It's the kind of talent for all intents and purposes that you can't coach. And it's the kind of talent that has been with him his whole playing career, right? And I think, for those who got to see him out at Craven Week, for those who got to see him captain the under-20 side in 2022, I think it was, and that campaign that he had, there was that Currie Cup season that he had playing at fullback before breaking into the box setup. And even in the box setup, he's played at 10 and he's played at 15, he's played at 12 for the Stormers, kick and do it all. I think the challenge now is, and someone said it must have been in another pod not so long ago. It definitely wasn't the first time, because I've heard others from different sporting codes say the same thing, that from a particular point in professional sport, the difference in talent is a point percentage, right? Is anywhere between 0.1 and 0.9%. There's not much difference between the average players. And those that really stand out are maybe better than the average by like 2 percentage points, It's not as vast as what we may like to think it is. But what separates them? So talent is not the thing. Talent is what gets you there. It's then the mentality, how you go about, displaying the talent, being very careful, knowing that you can do it all. And because you can do it all doesn't mean that you should do it all. And I think that's, the part that one potentially has to learn in a Sacha at this stage of his career. He's still 24? Still 24. He's not yet 25. So he's still a kid. He still has a lot of that learning to do. And that learning ultimately would result in him, knowing when it is to just sit in the pocket and kick, knowing what the game calls for, knowing how it is to bring the backline in, knowing that because he possibly can do what he sets out to do, but because he can doesn't mean that he should. And I think that mental shift, It's probably what needs to happen now. There's still enough time to be able to get it right between now and the World Cup. Because let me tell you now, mate, he gets the temperament right. I'm telling you now, we are going to be witnessing one of the greatest fly-halves to ever play at this level, if he gets the temperament right. And I think that's what's happening. If you look at the game against, if I could just finish that quickly, the game against Argentina, the complaint was, universally, that we didn't have control of the game. Certainly in the first half, right? I think it took Andre Pollard to come on at fly half to create the try and to then bag the penalty to create that level of control. But if you noticed, he went out to fullback. Why? Because I suppose the mood in which he was in, being able to still catch, being able to still have that, being able to still run at the attack, at the defense from that position could still add value. So he still had a skill set that would be useful and that was required and would have been useful at the time. I think now the challenge, and that's the challenge that every young player goes through, is the step from relying on your talent to then now start to develop the temperament so that you can then rely on that temperament in the moments that matter, because that's what counts, not talent. It's the temperament. And temperament, by the way, is how we won the World Cup in 2023. Andre Pollard's temperament, that is.
No, for me, I just hope he doesn't become, I remember us having this conversation with some of our work colleagues at our old place, I said, even then, it's not going to work. And I usually remember this. All guys were saying, Liebok this, Liebok this. I said, guys, that's awesome for when you're having fun. But when it's time to get down to it, ultimately, no exciting fly half. There is not a single exciting fly half that's ever won a Rugby World Cup. Not since it's happened. Whether it's Fox, it's Michael Liner, it's Joel Stransky, it's Stephen Larkham, it's Johnny Wilkinson, it's Butch James, and people make a mistake with Daniel Carter. I think they think DC was exciting first. He wasn't. He played like an accountant. He let his boot control the game, and then if you want to go there, we can go there because he's one of one. It's nearly impossible to have an accountant's mindset and then the ability to, Daniel Carter could have played 1 to 15. And remember, he did play fullback. Daniel Carter could do anything. So I think it's important to also don't make anomaly the rule. The rule generally is your fly-off actually has to be boring to win. I'm not saying to excite. There's a reason Carlos Spencer didn't play for the All Blacks and Andrew Mertens did. Ultimately, as you say, when you get to that level, what you want is predictability. And there's two guys right now, and they're on the opposite side of the field, Beauden Barrett and Damien McKenzie. There's a reason why, right? Mwanga had to be brought back into the fold. Everybody said, nah, Mwanga's got to go. He's not exciting enough. The Beauden Barrett thing didn't work because at fly half, you can't be a gadget guy. And I hope, Sacha, as you've said brilliantly there, is just because you can do it, it doesn't mean you must. What you have to do is become predictable and specialize if you want to be a fly half. I don't like the fact that Sacha's still going to fullback. I don't think people think utility is a positive thing. Rugby's gone past that. I want, especially fly half. Fly half's the most important position. Specialize and master it. Don't go, oh, I can play for. You're going to become Beauden Barrett, where it's like, okay, we can't win with this guy if we have to center the game around him because I can't predict what he's going to do. And whilst I know it's romantic, it's exciting, I don't think Springbok rugby, again, we want Derek Hoogaard. I know people don't like that. I'm telling you what it takes to win is, and you said something, and again, we disagree here. I don't think you can change him now. I think the animal has been built, and largely speaking, people don't change. People are who they are. And men in particular, once you have paid men are different from women. Once you have paid a man, you affirm his behavior. And Sacha now is getting all of the accoutrements. It's the modeling, it's the money, it's the girlfriend, it's the love. And I don't think he can change, but you think he can. And I think it's important to go back in history. History is our teacher, right? Is exciting fly-offs don't win World Cups. That's my first thing. And my other thing about him is it'll be interesting to see when the pressure comes on. And I think his injuries are a big reason that his ego is involved. He's not actually as big as he thinks he is. And I know he loves the physicality. Damien Willemse had this problem for a while, where they would just go hell for leather and wouldn't protect their bodies. This is where the brilliance of Pollard, of Wilkinson, and I mean, Wilkinson was an unbelievable defender, probably the best, along with Henry Honeyball, the best tackling fly halves for me. Stephen Larkham, Matt Giteau, I think Honeyball and Wilkinson, just being an unbelievable, like shutdown 10, that channel. But there was still an element of, I'm going to protect myself. I'm not carrying the ball 60% of the time because I've got the talent. No. I've got an inside center for that. I've got Peter Steph for that. Stop having your ego make you think, I want to prove to my teammates, guys, that I can do it. No, that is not your job, Sacha. I need you on the field in the 70th minute. I need you playing 12 tests a season, not 6 brilliant tests a season. And I think I worry that can't change. I mean, maybe I'm being too negative. And again, people will say, you sound like an old guy. Well, guess who runs sport? Old guys like me. And older, by the way. Old conservative rich guys make the decisions. I know people hate to hear that.
Look, of the World Cup winning fly-offs that you just mentioned now, of the lot, I think Stephen Larkham is a very interesting one. Stephen Larkham, did a kick for pause, right? And of his arsenal and his skill set, his kicking game, whilst absolutely, effective, was at best his third best asset, right? And, used equally to his passing as well as his running, right? Remember, he was a fullback, right? So running was instinctive in his game. He caught just half a gap, he'll take it, right? And to the point where his game went as far as, we were talking about it the other day, defining not just the team and that generation of players, but the era of Wallabies rugby, right? Wallabies rugby was expansive, it was quick. Oh. Although physical, they would, like they'll take it coast to coast. They did not worry about riding you ragged, and they would give if given the chance. And that came down to Stephen Larkham. So I think, but the point there is he had that skill set. The pass, we talk about how Manny Limber can fizz a pass. Stephen Larkham, come on. You know what I'm saying? Few had as accurate a fizz as that man, right? It's knowing when to deploy what is needed at any given time. And that, again, is temperament, right? Knowing in the 20th minute what is needed, in the 30th minute, in the 60th minute of a quarterfinal, of a semi-final, of a final. Do you remember that 2003 final where I think it was Lotte Tikiri's try, where in the 22, he grabbed it and he put up that up and under in England's 22. So they were attacking in the opponent's 22, takes it, deciding that, you know what, I'm going to go and do something a little bit unexpected so as to open up the game. And then I'm going to rely on the bounce for Lottie or whoever it is to grab it and go and score. And that's exactly what happened. And I think Jason Robinson is the one that scored before that. And he did that so as to catch up to England. That's the sort of decision-making capability in situ that I'm talking about. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you should, always go for pause, because again, he never went for pause, right? But he was at the center of fucking everything. And the reason why is because he knew what to do given the moment in which him and the team and where the game and the momentum of the game was going. And I think that for me is, and in this day and age, that comes down to, kicking it safe, putting your forwards in a great position, getting the penalty and ultimately going for points because you want to keep the scoreboard ticking. But it all comes down to control and how you best control the game. And I think Stephen Larkham is just a maverick because he could control it in more than in one way. And I don't think now's the time to experiment with that. I think now's the time is just to, surrender to the system and just do what the system demands of you.
It's disgusting how people talk about Stephen Larkham as just like a sideshow. He's one of the greatest. He's one of the greatest rugby players. He's one of the greatest. His fault is that he was next to George Gregan. His problem was that he was next to Gregan, and Gregan, Gregan took all the oxygen out of the room, and people forget about Stephen Larkham. And this word is overused. Great. He was an era-defining great rugby player. But the other thing, and I want to finish off on this, just to go on your point. Ultimately, my hope for Sacha, I don't want him to become Damien McKenzie. I don't want him to become Beauden Barrett, who are gadget guys, essentially, right? They aren't a fly half. They aren't a fullback. And utility is for squad players. If Sacha wants to become not a guy, the guy, the difference for me at fly half, again, this is not about any other position. Fly half is unique, right? He's your most important rugby player. If you want to be the next level of fly half, you can't play fly half. You have to think fly half. Think about all of them. Wilkinson, Daniel Carter is the greatest at it. Pollard, right? They aren't playing the position. They're thinking the position. So they are thinking, where am I going in 5 phases time? Right? Where do I want to end up? Not what's happening in this physical confrontation now, which is what the ego, and I see Sacha getting involved far too much in that mano-a-mano confrontation. At fly half, you've got to be playing chess and go, where do I want my forwards to be in 5 phases time? Because, and also, by the way, the forwards must know that. It mustn't be an X-factor thing. The X-factor stuff, if you watch the way test matches unfold, generally, which is why a lot of changes happen around 55, 60 minutes in rugby, that's when you need your X factor. The legs start to go. As you said, the talent gap is too small. But in the first 60 minutes, there's a reason why I need you to be predictable. There is, in 5 phases, your locks and your props need to know where the ball's going to end up. I can't, at 125 kilograms, be going coast to coast because you want to be exciting. And I think it was Liebok's downfall. I think it's Mackenzie's downfall. I think it was Beauden Barrett's downfall, which is why Mwanga just had to come back, because it's a team game. And if that guy isn't predictable, it doesn't matter how brilliant the rest of the team is. It all falls apart. And I don't want Sacha to become that, because if he stays humble enough to say, I'm going to let the game come to me, but 65, 70 minutes, I'm then going to let the razzle-dazzle take over. If he can do that by protecting himself and staying fit and reining his ego in, I obviously see the talent, but I just worry more about the personality than anything else. And, Lesego, I wish him the best. People are going to say you sound like an old fogey, but I've been watching rugby and sport too long. Winners are winners, and there are some traits that last throughout time, whether you like it or not. Talent's not interesting, as you said. It's about personality. If you want to go Stephen Larkham, Johnny Wilkinson, and Daniel Carter.
Preach. That's exactly it.
Yeah, Lesego, we're going to be doing this throughout the series, and I think it's going to be awesome. It's going to be something a little bit different. We'll do, so for our MKT show viewers, we'll do this sort of throughout the weeks. We'll do some review shows as well. So leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you've got to say. What are your thoughts on the series? Who do you think is going to win? I'd like to hear from people in the comments. Who do you think the crucial battles are? Are they at fly half? Is it the Lucies? Adi Savea, is he going to be crucial for the All Blacks? Where can the All Blacks get the edge? Where do the Springboks have the edge? Is the Springbok front row just going to be too strong? The tight 5. What about the lock problem? Is Eben Etzebeth too old? Should he be playing? I'd love for you to let us know in the comments so we can respond to some of your thoughts and throughout the series. Lesego, it's going to be brilliant. I'm looking forward to doing all of this, man. It's rugby season. It's sports season. The Premier League's back. As sports fundies and hardcore sports fans, what a time to be alive.
No, exactly that. Enjoy the game this weekend. Enjoy the Premier League this weekend. Is it this weekend? It is this weekend.
Oh, yes. You better believe
enjoy the Premier League this weekend.
Yeah.
And I'll see you next week.
But by the way, Man United top 4?
Yes.
Lesego's a Man United fan. Top 4, guaranteed.
Top 4. Guaranteed. As it was last season.
Man United guaranteed top
guaranteed. Top 3.
There you have it. Whoa! A top 3. Wow.
As it was last season. Nothing different to last season. Nothing different. It'll be the same.
Nothing different.
It'll be the same results.
Goodness. Have a listen to this guy. He's a big Man United fan. All right. Lesego, appreciate you, brother. Looking forward to next week. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is MKT. He's been Lesego Thomas. This has been the MKT Show podcast. And for now, we are the hell out of here.